The Australian housing market begins the year on a tear. Peak TV is over with the number of new shows declining, and it's SuperBowl Monday where the ads cost $7 million for 30 seconds. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Monday, the 12th of February 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you are speaking with another one of our kind of semi-regular guests, another must-listen, of course, Josh Gilbert from eToro.
Yeah, that's right. Reporting season pushes into full swing this week, I'd say. We've got some big companies reporting. So I talked to Josh all about that. We talk a bit about the miners. We talk about the lithium plays, so much going on in that sector at the moment. We also talk about real estate investment trusts and travel companies and the retailers. Josh, always interesting, able to put it into plain English. Well worth a listen.
Yeah, it was really interesting, I thought, hearing his take on Qantas from an investor's perspective. And he goes into some detail on that. So really good chat. It is coming up after the show, so stick around for that one. The main story this morning, Sean, the housing market has begun 2024 in much finer fettle than it finished 2023, with more auctions and very high clearance rates, while prices have been maintained.
Not sure how many people were predicting a preliminary clearance rate of 76.2% across the country for the weekend's auctions, or 80.4% in Sydney, which is the highest rate since October 2021. But I'm guessing it wasn't many. For the second week in a row, clearance rates have smashed the level of a year ago, even though there have been many more auctions, according to CoreLogic data. National clearance rates over the weekend were the highest since early June last year. Pretty incredible. CoreLogic's research director, Tim Lawless, called this strength a radical turnaround from December, where the preliminary clearance rates were in the mid-60s. He said, while it's early in the season, it seems there's better matching of buyer and seller expectations. And, of course, the talk of interest rate cuts later in the year, that's certainly helping out.
Now, Sean, you mentioned the Sydney clearance rate, and 80.4% is really quite spectacular, isn't it? What about the other capital cities, though?
Adelaide led the way at 86%. It always seems to lead the way at Adelaide. We've got buyers and sellers pretty much in sync in that particular capital city. There's more than 100 auctions there over the weekend. In Melbourne, it was 73.1% from 618 auctions. That's about the same number of auctions as Sydney. That Melbourne number is very high. Melbourne tends to trade somewhat lower than Sydney, so 73.1% is a great result for that city. Brisbane came in at 71%. Another city which tends to trade lower than Sydney and Melbourne, in fact. 71% is a great outcome. Canberra was at 61%. The question is, what will happen to prices? Now, thus far, they've been rising this year, albeit slowly. In January, prices were up 0.4% across the country. That's the 12th straight rise, or the 12th straight monthly rise. There's a bunch of economists now predicting price growth of between 5 and 10% for the full year. All things being equal, interest rate cuts will help push prices higher as more demand hits an already overcrowded market.
All right. How did local markets finish up on Friday, Sean?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up just a touch to 7,645 points, meaning that across the week the bourse was down just a little under 1%, basically. Notwithstanding that fall, it is still trading close to record levels. Now, the December half earnings season gains a bit of momentum this week, with JB Hi-Fi reporting today. James Hardie, Breville and Seven West Media report tomorrow. Then on Wednesday, Commonwealth Bank leads the way. Thursday's a big one. Goodman Group, Origin Energy, South 32, Wesfarmers, Treasury Estate, and of course, more than 1 million shareholders' favourite, Telstra. On Friday, it's IAG and QBE, the insurers.
And what about international markets?
Well, the S&P 500 closed above 5,000 points for the first time over the weekend, something that we should certainly celebrate. Well, I don't want to celebrate. We should market it anyway. The big tech stocks, of course, are leading the way, particularly NVIDIA, Amazon, Alphabet, and Microsoft. For the week, the S&P 500 was up 1.5%. Now, the S&P 500 has risen in 14 of the past 15 weeks. Surely something has to give at some point. In economic news, US monthly inflation was revised lower for December. It was up just 0.2% for the month. Otherwise, Brent crude's up a bit. Gold's trading around $2,020 an ounce. The Aussie dollar's buying 65.3 US cents. And cryptos have surged. Bitcoin's now trading above $48,000 a unit.
Sean, just very quickly before we take a break, a quick little shout out to EMEA, a most enthusiastic advocate if I can.
Yes,
And of course,
please.
our MIA is an award that we present to listeners who have done a fantastic job of spreading the word about fear and greed. Our most enthusiastic advocate, MEA or MIA, which is the least kind of catchy acronym around, but it unfortunately has stuck. And at some point soon, we'll have mugs and various other pieces of merchandise that will have MIA emblazoned.
We have been promising mugs for months, possibly years, but this time we really mean it. There are mugs on the way.
Oh, now, Sean, I got this note via Instagram from a listener by the name of Matt, who said, love the Fear and Greed podcast, very early day listener. Love the banter and solid news delivery. He wanted to give a special mention, though, to the weekend edition, which, of course, comes on the weekend, as the name suggests. And that is a very competitive environment between you and me, battling it out to see who can pick the best stories of the week. And our Fear and Greed colleague Adam Lang is our judge, and he helps us pick a winner. And he says, the weekend edition is a good listen when it's the only podcast my wife doesn't interrupt. And so Matt has been a very good advocate. He's been telling people out there about Fear and Greed, and he loves the weekend edition. So for that, if we had a Fear and Greed Mia mug, Matt would be receiving one. Instead, it is the promise of a mug, which is almost as good.
Yeah, well, Matt, your name is top of the list for when this mug arrives. We reckon it's going to arrive. What I love about that is that you decide to pick a Mia that mentions the weekend edition. And of course, last weekend, lo and behold, for the first time in 2024, who wins that competition? Yes, Michael Thompson, 2.5 to 1.5, defeats myself. And so suddenly you're talking about it.
Yeah, well, suddenly I had good cause to mention it, Sean. Those wins don't happen very often. So I needed to bring it up, and Matt's message just happened to fall into the Fear and Greed inbox. It actually came in about 6 months ago, and I've just been sitting on the right sitting for the right moment to bring it up. Anyway, I thought today was a good day. We better get on with it. We've got a fair bit to cover. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Federal Treasurer Jim Chalmers has been doing the media rounds, and he's pretty adamant that there won't be changes to capital gains tax or negative gearing under this government.
Dr. Chalmers said while the government discussed all elements of the tax system with the Treasury Secretary, it's not because they're proposing changes to capital gains tax or the taxing of trusts. He said the government has a very broad and ambitious housing agenda and a full book when it comes to tax reform, and the focus is on legislating it. Now, this is the problem for the government. While there's a bunch of tax changes outlined last week that were liked by the electorate, it is a broken election promise. And the opposition can continually put fear into the market simply by saying you can't trust Labor on taxes like negative gearing and capital gains tax because they've backflipped before. Will they backflip again? It's really interesting to see that work out. This is the second week of Parliament. Of course, it'll be a very busy week with all that legislation being pushed through, the IR stuff as well. So, exciting if you're a Canberra buff, Michael.
Yeah, certainly is. And when you think about the tax changes and the industrial relations reform last week, it would be very hard to match the pace of change that was delivered in really what was 4 sitting days last week.
Yeah, big week.
Indeed. And speaking of last week, Sean, on Friday, Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock appeared before Senate estimates, and she had plenty to say. Significantly, she reiterated that it's not essential that inflation reaches 2.5% before the central bank moves on interest rates.
Instead, the bank needs to be very confident that inflation is going to fall into the 2 to 3% target band and stay there. The governor said the world economy has demonstrated great resilience and is doing better than expected a year ago, but a slowing China might be a problem for Australia. On interest rates, she said she hasn't ruled out another increase because inflation at the current rate of 4.1% isn't good enough, notwithstanding encouraging recent data. Her comments have just toned down the enthusiasm about a rate cut anytime soon. While many think it will come around September, others they're just not so sure. In fact, some are pushing it back till 2025. Jarden Australia chief economist Carlos Cacho is one. He says Bullock's focus on upside risks to inflation rather than downside risks to the economy hints that there might not actually be a move this year at all.
I love the fact that even though we now have so much more access to the Reserve Bank governor and so many more words that have been spoken publicly and so many more questions being asked, there is still so much speculation about kind
Yep.
of what the language used means and what is actually going to be happening.
I dare say, because we have so much more access, the speculation ups because whatever she says, people use it to make their case for whether they think there'll be an interest rate cut or a hike or whatever. And so I reckon this is a new era of trying to understand Reserve Bank speak. Oof, help me.
It's very exciting, Sean. Now, professional services firm PwC still has a tough road ahead of it following last year's damning revelations that a partner used privileged information from government to help clients develop tax avoidance schemes. On Friday, the Tax Practitioners Board said it has 9 ongoing investigations into the matter.
3 of those are well advanced and will inform the others, according to Chair Peter DeCure. He says PwC has been mostly cooperative in terms of providing information, but he would have appreciated it if the firm had provided the board with a report on the role of international partners into the tax leak matter. The Australian Tax Office was also in front of Senate on Friday. It said there's an inherent conflict when firms work for the government and also provide tax advice to clients. It also said it was frustrated it hadn't seen that same report.
Sean, early childhood educators across Australia will walk off the job next month to pressure the Albanese government to fund a 25% pay rise.
The United Workers Union says more than 1,000 centres in regions and metropolitan areas, mostly in the eastern states, will be forced to close their doors on March 8 as a result of the stop work, according to the Financial Review. The industrial action is the first involving Labor's new multi-employer bargaining laws, which allows unions to reach sector-wide agreements under the law's supported bargaining stream. The government, as funder, has been forced to the table with the centres and unions to negotiate over backing the wage rise. Government representatives first entered the negotiations at the end of last year, but have so far not given any confirmation of funding. Now, the union, the United Workers Union, Early Education Director Helen Gibbons said that educators had been using multi-employer bargaining to set a new standard for wages in the sector. Few things about this. Do childcare workers deserve a 25% pay rise? Yes, no, whatever your opinion is. But just the fact that they're using this new legislation to force all the owners of the childcare centres, and in this case it's the government, to the table for one massive bargaining round, like a multi-employer bargaining round. It's going to be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it sure will. Now, BHP, Rio Tinto and BlueScope have joined an Australian-first collaboration aimed at fast-tracking the path to nearly carbon-free production by steelmakers relying on Australia's number one export, iron ore.
Yeah, this is quite innovative. Under the initiative, the 3 companies will develop a pilot plant that will prove production of molten iron from West Australian ores is feasible using renewable power in something called direct reduced iron process technology. Please don't ask me for the details on that one. The project aims to head off the risk that iron ore from the Pilbara, which is actually lower grade than many other ores, trying to head off that it doesn't become increasingly discounted or face declining demand as importers strive to meet net zero emissions targets. Several locations across Australia will be assessed for the proposed plant, including BlueScope's Port Kembla steel mill. Pre-feasibility work should be completed by the year end, and the pilot plant, expected to cost hundreds of millions of dollars, could come into operation as early as 2027. Of course, a bunch of approvals to get through first.
Okay, international news now, Sean. Jailed former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan effectively won the country's election over the weekend.
Imran Khan's colleagues were barred from contesting Pakistan's election under their party's name, but the candidates who are part of Khan's party ran as independents, and they put forth a very strong showing. Independents, mostly backed by the former Prime Minister, won 100 of 265 contested lower house seats. Nawaz Sharif's Pakistan Muslim League took 71 seats, while a third party took 54 seats. The independent strong performance points to Khan's enduring popularity among the nation's 129 million registered voters, many of whom are struggling to make ends meet amid the fastest inflation in Asia. Khan's loyalists won most seats, therefore they've got the first right to form a government.
Sean, I think we can call this now. It is official. TV has peaked. Last year in the US, 516 scripted television series aired or streamed, down 14% from a year before.
In fact, it's only the second drop in at least 15 years, according to FX Cable Research. Now, a report in the New York Times says orders for shows by major studios started to drop in the middle of 2022, and then last year's screenwriters and actor strike added to the melee. Virtually every studio has slowed investment in making new television shows. Several media companies don't invest in scripted series anymore. Google and Facebook aggressively invested in traditional scripted television about 5 years ago. Both have effectively stopped now. The broadcast networks are making fewer scripted shows, as are many cable networks like USA, TBS, and Comedy Central. Basically, the call is peak TV is over.
Sean, finally, big story to finish on here. Super Bowl 58 is in Las Vegas starting late morning on the Australian East Coast. It has never been more expensive and has never had more glitz.
For those who don't know or aren't interested, it's the San Francisco 49ers versus the Kansas City Chiefs. There's two starting quarterbacks, Brock Purdy for the 49ers, Patrick Mahomes for the Chiefs, are both considered greats of the game. If you don't know anything about it, go and watch the Netflix series on it. Patrick Mahomes is a star in that. He's a star all around, really. One of the Chiefs' biggest players, well, I suppose most famous players, I shouldn't say biggest, most famous players, a guy called Travis Kelce. Well, Trav dates Tay-Tay, Taylor Swift. She'll be flying in from Japan for the game before then heading to Australia for concerts in Sydney and Melbourne later in the week. The conspiracy theorists are suggesting she could somehow use her star power to help Joe Biden win this year's presidential election via the Super Bowl. Don't get that at all, but anyway. Tickets on average are about $14,000 each. That's Australian dollars. A bit over 9,000 US dollars. $14,000 each. This is on average. These aren't the flash ones. One of the world's top chefs, Rasmus Monk of Alchemist, is flying in from Copenhagen to host pop-up restaurants, as you do. The cost of a 30-second slot on CBS during the game is $7 million. And there's about 50-plus advertisers prepared to pay that, competing for the attention of the 100 million-plus viewers. You get the gist. It's going to be a big day, Michael.
It certainly is. And Sean, the funny thing is, usually in the lead up to the Super Bowl, there's always talk about kind of the halftime entertainment. And you would be forgiven for thinking, if you Google Super Bowl now, Taylor Swift is like the first thing that pops up. She's not performing.
No.
Like, you'd be forgiven for thinking that she was in fact the kind of the main draw card here. And it's Usher.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow. Go the Chiefs. I'm a Chiefs fan. I know there's an Australian punter in the 49ers team, so maybe we should all be going for the San Francisco 49ers. But ever since I watched that Netflix show on Patrick Mahomes, he's the quarterback for the Chiefs. Hard not to be a fan of the Chiefs.
I'm just looking forward to hearing Usher perform Yeah. I'm assuming he's going to do that. It's one of his biggest hits.
You are one of a handful of 100 million people who are talking about that right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that song, that I think came out in like 2004, because I remember cruising around Charles Sturt Uni in Bathurst in my 1989 Toyota Celica, white lightning with the pop-up headlights, with Yeah just blasting out of the speakers. God, I was cool. Maybe not in hindsight. Maybe I wasn't as cool as I thought.
Do you reckon it was peak Michael cool?
Yes. Yeah, and it was a very low peak. And it's all been downhill from there. Anyway, Sean, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. You're speaking with Josh Gilbert from eToro.
Yes, all about earnings season and companies to keep an eye on. You mentioned it earlier on. He has great insight into Qantas. So if you're a Qantas fan or you're thinking about investing in Qantas, Woolworth Listen also talks about REITs and retailers and travel companies, lithium companies, all sorts of things.
Yeah, and of course, we're not an investing podcast, and you should seek professional advice before making investment decisions. But it is great to hear what someone like Josh has to say about all of those companies and all of those sectors. It is up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au, and also available today, Sean, is Fear and Greed the Week Ahead, featuring resident economist Stephen Koukoulas.
Well, what a week we had last week with the Reserve Bank not doing anything on interest rates, but Michelle Bullock facing the media. She also faced Senate estimates. I wonder which one she disliked more, the media or the politicians.
Politicians. It would have to be the politicians, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because, at least with the media, everyone was kind of on her side. It felt a little bit like it was kind of a fun environment kind of thing. But no one goes into Senate estimates to have fun.
Yes, so Stephen's very excited about what happened last week, also about what's happening this week. Unemployment's a big one this week. We get unemployment figures, and of course, inflation's one side of the story. The growth and employment market is the other side. So it'll be fascinating to see where that comes down.
Yeah, definitely worth a listen to the week ahead. It is coming up after the interview with Josh Gilbert. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Monday, the 12th of February, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and please join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.